Good afternoon, Master Gardeners. I'm so glad that you're here for the monthly webinar. We'll go ahead and get started. My name is Wendy Wilbur. I'm the statewide Master Gardener Volunteer Coordinator, and I'm welcoming you to the webinar today for October. And so let's go ahead and get started. If you could just pop in the chat box, please, where you are joining from, and answer the question, are there bats where you live? So I'm curious to know if there's bats where you live and if you encounter them. I know we usually have representatives from the whole state of Florida, so it'll be interesting to see what counties are joining in today. I do want to welcome you and say that I'm glad you're here and learn about bats and the benefits of bats and bats in the landscape today. I do have to give you full disclosure. This is a recording of me. I am not here today, but don't worry, the webinar is going to run perfectly fine without me in real life. So, all right, I can see that we have a lot of folks joining from all over. Thank you for being here. My shameless plug of the month is to go out and purchase your Master Gardener swag, like ladies polos, men's polos, the wonderful canvas tote bag, the best hat ever, and the Master Gardener cling. These are all available at the IFAS bookstore, and the purchase of these specific items helps to support our programs and programming. So thank you for that. And for the webinar today, please limit the use of chat just for the activating question that we just did. During the presentation, just put your questions in the question and answer box, and we will make sure that the speaker gets to those questions and answers the best that they can. So today it is my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Shelly Johnson. She's a wonderful state specialized agent, specifically in natural resources with IFAS Extension, and she's also an affiliate faculty member in the Department of Wildlife Ecology and Conservation at the University of Florida. Shelly has a lot of things going on, and I'm going to tell you just a little bit about them. She is the director of the Natural Area Training Academy. She is the state leader for Florida Youth Naturalist Program, and she coordinates a really interesting program called Empower You Florida. And that's a really neat program that teaches people how to be engaged in community decisions. She also runs Nature Knowledge, which is an interesting extension program, as well as firescaping. She's quite expert at that, and other natural resource extension programming, and specifically bats. And that is what she's here to talk to us about today. So Shelly, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Master Gardener webinar. We have a great group of people who tune into every webinar, and I really hope that they connect with your topic today about the benefits of bats in their landscape. So Shelly, thank you so much for being here. I truly appreciate it, and I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and turn the stage over to you.
All right, thank you. I'm really excited to be here today. I'm going to share my screen so that you can see that. So yeah, I'm excited to be here. My name is Shelly Johnson, as Wendy did. Thank you for the introduction. And it is that time of year when everyone is thinking about bats. And so even though I like to remind people that bats are important all year round, but this is when people are thinking about it. So a lot of people want to talk about bats and learn about bats. And so I am here. I'm here for it any time of the year, and I'm definitely here for it in October. So today I want to definitely share with you some of the benefits of bats and the importance of conserving different types of bat habitat, especially in relation to you being a Master Gardener volunteer and thinking about the landscape a lot. I want to make sure that you're informed of how beneficial bats are and the types of habitats that they use. But along with that, since I'm hoping you'll be out there talking to people about how important bats are, I also want you to have a few nuggets of knowledge in your back pocket to know about, alleviating some of the myths and misconceptions and maybe some of the fears that people have around bats, because you may be the people that are interacting with the general public. And so I want you to have all the important information. So a little bit about me before we jump into the content. As Wendy mentioned, I am very interested in working with bats, and I have a long history of working with bats. I started working with bats first in Texas. I was in wildlife rehabilitation, and we would occasionally get bats in, and I was the one at the center that really liked to work with the bats. And then eventually, I several years later went on to do a master's degree, and I was working in Arizona at the time. And that's where this picture is taken. This is a spotted bat in the Grand Canyon, and there's a lot of amazing bats in the Southwest U.S. And that I really got hooked forever at that point. So did a lot of bat work there, a lot of telemetry and tracking and habitat use studies of bats in Arizona. I later worked in Madagascar on fruit bats there as part of a bigger biodiversity project, and then returned and ended up in Wyoming as the bat biologist for the state there, doing monitoring for a year and a half before I ended up here in Florida. And now my position as a state specialized agent is more in the education role and the outreach role. And so I'm not doing active research per se, but I do very involved in the bat community in Florida. I'm chair of the Florida Bat Working Group, which is comprised of about 80 people right now are part of our group, people that are doing bat work as part of their job, either agency folks that are doing research or monitoring or habitat improvements, or consultants that are out doing monitoring, and educators, rehabbers. So there's a lot of different people focused on bats around the state. And so I'm very involved with that, as well as some other programs that I'm developing, which I'll talk a little bit at the end about that. So today, want to cover a diversity of things, again, just to give you good background on bats in general, so that you understand more about the benefits that there are. So talk a little bit about bat basics, some of the diversity, habitats they use, some of the benefits, a little bit about bat houses, and also what to do if you encounter a bat in a building or somewhere on the ground. Because again, I'm trying to hopefully give you information to share with others so that people are not as scared and fearful of bats. So first of all, bats are really unique. The one thing, I think I first fell in love with bats in my undergraduate mammalogy class, when I really understood that bats are such a unique animal. They're the only mammal that can fly. No other mammals can truly fly. There are things like flying squirrels that are actually gliders, but the only mammal that can fly is a bat. Their age, their size, the reproduction is very unique. For a very small animal, they have a very low reproductive rate and they live a very long time. That's not a normal pattern that we see in small mammals. They have a really long life cycle. That's not normal for such a small mammal. And they can hibernate, they can go into torpor, which is like a short-term hibernation. They have super high metabolism. They echolocate, so they can see around in the dark. And so there's all these things that are super interesting about bats that are very unique to them. And I'll touch on a lot of these as we go through the presentation today. Here is the picture of a bat wing. So the order of bat is Chiroptera, which actually means hand wing. And you can see, if we compare this to a bird wing, instead of the whole arm moving, it's actually the fingers that are making up the wing. And so in this picture, you can see that's the thumb on the top, and then those are the four fingers. And then the skin connects them, and that connects to the elbow and to the body, and that's what it makes up the wing. So they're actually moving their hands. I don't know if you can see my hands. They're moving their hands when they're flying, as opposed to birds, which are actually moving their whole arm. So they have very unique flight in that way. One of the myths that we often hear about is that bats are flying mice. That's one that you'll hear often, and it is not true. The origin of bats, based on skeletal and body structure, is actually we've learned more recently through using DNA techniques that bats are actually more closely related to carnivores and ungulates, which would be down here at the bottom of this chart. And so, and actually humans and mice are up here, and we're actually more closely related to each other than either of us are related to bats, which are down here. So that all to say, bats are not flying mice. They're not rodents. They don't act like rodents. They don't have the same behaviors as rodents or bodies as rodents. So they're very different. I mentioned this earlier, so the bats are small and they're long-lived. This is not typical. Generally, a mammal with a very small body size is short-lived with a lot of offspring. For example, mice. They're short-lived, they have a lot of offspring. That's not the case with the bat. Bats, generally, each mother has one pup per year. There's some species that have twins, but even then, they're only having one breeding time per year. So they're having one pup per year unless they have twins. And then also we know bats can live up to 30 years, maybe longer, depending on the species. So they're very long lived and not reproducing at a high rate. They have echolocation. So we often hear they have sonar. And what this means is they're actually using this to navigate. The myth is that bats are blind, and that is not true. Bats can see. They can see just like you and I can see, but in complete darkness, where there's absence of all light, they can't see with their eyes, just like we cannot see with our eyes in absence of complete light. But when it's completely dark, they can use echolocation, and we can't. So basically what they're doing is yelling out of their mouth really loudly, and then that sound is bouncing off of whatever's in front of it, and it's coming back at them. And their big ears are able to hear that sound coming back, and it gives them kind of an image in front of them of what is closer and what is farther away in order to see like which way they should fly, either to go around obstacles or sometimes to chase down a moth or a prey. And so if something's bouncing back closer and then they're chasing it and they're getting closer and closer and closer to it, that sound is bouncing back quicker and quicker and quicker until they get it and then they bite it. So think of like when you dribble a basketball and then you get closer and closer and closer to the ground, it gets faster and faster. So it's that same sound. And here's a kind of an example of what that is demonstrating. And we actually can use this to study bats. And so this is a sonogram, a visual output of the sound that a bat is making. And so as bats are flying around at night, they're making these calls. Doop, 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 doop. Just like a bird might be chirping, they're making that sound. And it's actually very loud. So it's above our hearing range. So it's higher pitched than our human ears can hear for most species of bats. And we often will say to people, if we could hear it, it would be very deafening. It would be very loud. It would be like holding a smoke detector near your ears, because they're yelling very loudly. And so if we went out in the forest at night and we could actually hear all of the bats, it would be like a crazy loud jungle of sounds everywhere. But since our human ears we're way down here, we can't hear that high pitch. We think, well, it's quiet. There's no bats. There's actually a lot of noise going on. We just can't hear it. So another myth is that bats get caught in your hair. This is not true. So as I just mentioned, bats can use echolocation even when it's dark to navigate. And they're actually very, very good flyers. I mean, they're navigating around trees and bushes, other bats, around other animals. They can certainly go around our big, huge head. So, I mean, maybe if you have big hair and you have insects flying around your head, you may have bats coming around because they're maybe trying to eat those insects. So, bats could come whizzing by closely, but it's pretty unknown for them to really be a problem for them to be getting tangled in people's hair. There's different kinds of flying depending on the shape of different species. Some are more adapted to flying really fast and straight, and those bats eat on the wing, we say, so they eat in flight. So they either catching the prey with their mouth open or they're catching it with their tail membrane, and as they fly, and then they flicking it into their mouth. And we also have bats that have much broader wings and they can fly much slower. And so they can actually land on things or hover over leaves and maybe and like glean things like beetles. And so we have a wide variety of different foraging methods and hence a lot of different prey that they can also eat. So another myth that people are often worried about with bats is that they carry rabies. And it is true that bats can carry rabies, but also we know that it's a very low percentage. So it's about 0.5% of wild bats is the estimate of those that have rabies. It's one of the rarest diseases in the United States. And it's very unlikely that you're going to get rabies from a bat. That said, it is a fatal disease, and so if you do encounter a bat, you should always be very, very careful. Never touch a bat with your bare hands, and if you need to do any handling, you would always want to wear very thick leather gloves. So to be careful, but also it's kind of an overblown rumor that bats are all out there carrying rabies. They actually have very unique immune systems that are able to harbor a lot of viruses that are the source of a lot of interesting scientific study of like how does their immune system work and like what can we learn from it to help human immunology. So bat diversity. There's a lot of bats in the world and in the United States and even here in Florida. So I saw in the chat when you guys were sharing where you were from, which I saw all over the places from all over the state. And I saw then a lot of you, Wendy asked if you have bats there, and a lot of you said yes. So that's great. And then I saw a few that said no, or yeah, one or two or a few. And I'm here to tell you that you do. You all have bats where you live. There's bats all over the state of Florida in every place. You might just not see them very often. And they might be there and you just don't see them because they're coming out maybe well after dark. And they're maybe not hanging out where you're at, so you don't see them. So there are bats everywhere. They're all over the world. There are over 1,400 species in the world, and they're all everywhere except Antarctica and in the Arctic. So and the species keep growing, the numbers keep growing because we keep discovering new species, and also with genetics we keep identifying maybe something that was one species, we realize it's actually two totally different species. So that number keeps growing up pretty regularly. It grows. And we have a variety of different types of bats. We have the Megacoroptera, which are the flying foxes. Those can have a wingspan up to 6 feet. They are in Asia, Africa, Australia, so they're old world, and they're not in the United States or in the Americas. And we have all the other bats are what we call Microcoroptera. So the smallest of those is the bumblebee bat, and we don't have those in the United States, but they're just really cute, so I wanted to show you, and that's the smallest one that we have. So in the United States, we have 48 species, and they're all the Microcoroptera. And all of our bats in the United States, for the most part, are insectivorous. The exception would be very southern Arizona, like on the border of Mexico in the mountains. We get some nectar feeding bats, but all of our bats, for the most part, are insectivorous. So people will often one more fear, I think this might be the last one, is vampire bats. And so people will ask, do bats drink blood? And of the 1,400 species in the world, we do have 3 species of those 1,400 species that do feed on blood. They are not a danger to humans for the most part. They're very small. So this picture is probably the foot of a chicken. So you can see that bat next to it is pretty small. And they also are pretty, they're not coming in and like attacking the animal. They're just walking up to them quietly. They're cutting, making a little incision in their ankle, usually licking a few drops of blood, and then they're leaving. So they generally are feeding on livestock, ungulates, birds, perhaps. And so humans are not what they're generally feeding on. They do live in Central and South America. And again, there's really cool things about bats that people are actually studying the anticoagulant that's in them, that when they bite an animal, like what is in them that allows that to happen. So there's cool human biology that comes out of that as well. But again, not in the United States and not in Florida. So in Florida, we have 13 species of bats that live here year round. 2 of those are listed as federally endangered, and we have 7 additional species that are accidental or occasional. The wingspan of our bats. So this is where people often think that bats are really big. They go to a zoo or to someplace that has captive bats and they see the big fruit bats and they see the 6-foot wingspan. Our bats, if I hold your hand up like kind of a W, I mean, that's about the extent, that's about the size of most of our bats. They do range. Our smallest is about 8-inch wingspan. The biggest is about 12-inch wingspan. Body is about 2 or 3 inches and between 6 and 30 grams. And that goes up to our largest bat, which is our Bonta bat, which it's quite larger than our smallest bat, but not nearly as big as a fruit bat. So here's the list of the bats we have. And a lot of these can be really hard to tell apart. So I'm not going to focus on identification of different bats because really the importance is of conserving the habitat for as many different kinds of bats as possible. So we have 2 families, the Vespertilionidae, which make up the bats on the top list here, and then the family Melosidae, which is the free-tailed bats on the bottom. Gray bat is endangered. That lives in very far North Florida, generally found in caves in very low numbers. And then the Florida Bonta bat, which is in the southern half of the peninsula for the most part, and is actually maybe more common than we previously thought. As we're doing more research on them, we're finding more places where they're living. And so that is one that you may encounter if you're in South Florida. So the important thing to remember is that it is illegal to kill bats in Florida. And all of our bats are protected, even if they're not federally endangered. They're all protected based on the statutes of the state of Florida. You cannot use pesticides or poisons for the purpose of harming, killing, or deterring bats in Florida. And the minimum requirements that need to be followed if someone is going to remove bats from buildings and other structures is there's specific guidelines that are provided that you have to follow. So not a lot is known about the habitat and occurrence of bats in Florida, and that's why they're all protected partially because what we don't know, we can't necessarily say that we can destroy a certain amount of habitat and they'll be okay because we don't actually know the extent of where all of these species live. So we do try to be on the safe side, and we know bats are very vulnerable to disturbance and harm at their roosts and other structures. So that's why it's important to understand what is important for them to be able to survive. So yeah. And I'll talk a little bit about some of this at the end, but I can also send more information on this if this is something you're interested in. Okay, so bat habitat. So I start off talking about bat habitat the same way I talk about any other wildlife habitat. What do they need? They need the basics that everyone else needs. They need water, they need food, and they need shelter. So for bats, they are drinking water, and they often are drinking water first thing when they get up in the evening. It's often, and they're drinking water usually off of open water, and so flat water. So if there's an open pond with flat water, that's often the first thing they're going to go to when they wake up. So they're going to get a drink, and so they actually drink on the fly. Roosts are water. So food. We'll talk a bit about food more in a minute. But yeah, food, they need a place to forage. They need a place where there's insects and food available, and they need abundance of food. They have a very high metabolism. They need to eat a lot of food because it's very energetically expensive for them to be out flying around in the evening. And so they need to eat a lot while they're out there doing that. And then shelter. Shelter is extremely important for bats and probably one of the most limiting things about their basic needs. And so during the daytime, they need a day roost. So this is generally what we think of as where the bats are. So they might be roosting in vegetation, they might be roosting in a cave, they might be roosting in a bat house, under a bridge, and that is where they're at resting during the daytime. That's where they're raising their pups, which is very, very important to have a stable shelter for that time period. They are having social interaction because they're in colonies. So that daytime roost is very important. Oftentimes, they actually also have a night roost. So they may travel a long distance to go forage somewhere else, and they may actually take like a nap in the middle of the night and then get up again, do some more foraging before they come back home to wherever their day roost is. So here is a typical life cycle or annual cycle of a bat in North America. So we've got fall is when they're breeding, winter is when they're generally, if this is up north, so most of the country, they're either hibernating or they're migrating in the winter because it is too cold for them to stay out foraging and or there's no food out because it's cold. So, and then in the spring is when they're in maternity season. So that's when all the females get together in a roost generally and have their pups. And then in the summer, late summer, the pups start flying and the colonies start dispersing. And then the cycle continues. In Florida, our timeline is a little bit different because we don't have a super cold winter. And so most of our bats in Florida can use multiple roosts in a single year. And in some species, bats can inhabit seasonal roosts that are used for breeding or hibernation. But in Florida, our bats do not hibernate in caves during the winter like the bats up north. So they don't have to find a new roost necessarily, but they might. So we do see fluctuations with bats living in a roost in the summer. So even here on the UF campus, we have the big bat houses. If you've seen those in the summer, it is packed full of a maternity colony. And come late summer, all of the pups start flying, they disperse. And some of the bats stay in there all year. So even in December, January, February, we have some bats in there, but they're at much lower numbers. So the rest of them they've just dispersed. They're still in Florida, most likely. They're just don't need to be in a big group because they're not having their pups at that time. So maternity season in Florida is generally defined. In this case, it's actually the legally defined or the regulation defined time is April 15th to August 15th. And I say that because that is the time when you cannot do an exclusion of bats in a structure because we know that's when they're having their pups. So those are the dates that are set by FWC of when you can't do an exclusion, April 15th to August 15th. Our assumption is that after August 15th, that most of the pups are flying. And so at that point, you can do an exclusion if you have verified that the pups are flying. And then they disperse. And so, yeah, fall and winter, they're most likely staying around Florida, but they might be in different roosts. They might be using roosts more temporarily rather than going into one house and staying there for the whole several months. They might just be there for a few nights and then move on. And in the winter, if it gets too cold, they do go into what we call torpor. And so torpor is like a mini hibernation. It could just be for one night. It can just be even for a few hours. Basically, what happens is the temperature outside may drop too low, that they don't have enough energy to keep themselves warm enough to make it energetically accessible to stay awake and go forage. So if they're not going to be able to fly around and get enough food to keep them warm at a cold temperature, it makes more sense for them to kind of shut down and take a deep sleep. But after a day or two, it might warm up again and then they can come back out and the insects will be back out. And generally that cutoff temperature is around 50 degrees. So depends on where you are in the state. Certainly in North Florida, that's happening quite often. If you're in South Florida, that might happen very rarely. So your bats might be out every single night. All right, so where are bats living? So bats are living in caves. Most of you are probably aware of that because that is one of the kind of typical things we think of when we think of bats. We do have caves in Florida. We don't have a lot of caves, but we do have some caves and we do have colonies of bats that are living in them. Also, some things that for you to think about when you're thinking about your landscaping and your yard and habitat management and landscape management is that trees are a pretty common habitat for bats to use for a roost. Often the hollow dead trees are what they're using. So even if they're not dead, say like an oak tree that has a branch that has fallen off and there's a hollow inside, that is an excellent roost. Also, think of a pine tree maybe a snag, maybe a dead pine tree, but maybe it's not dead, or just maybe it's dying or decaying. And you have the bark maybe is peeling off in one spot. That provides a little space underneath that the bats can get up under. You'd be surprised how many bats can actually get under a peeling bark around a pine tree. You could have hundreds of bats in a roost. So trees, so whether it's a hardwood that's hollow inside or a softwood that has holes that they're using or a dead snag, those are all providing habitat potentially for different species of bats. Oh, here's a picture of the peeling bark. So this is a hardwood, but it's also very common in pine trees. So palm fronds are also a very common place where bats will roost. In particular, our tree roosting bats are the ones that will be found in palm fronds. And so we've got bats that tend to live in bigger colonies, and we've also got some bats that tend to be a little bit more solitary or in smaller groups, and those are the ones you'll often find in the palm fronds. And again, I'm not going to go into which species are exactly found where, because the basic importance is that all of our bats are protected. They're all really important. And they also can be hard, especially for someone that's not very experienced, to actually tell them apart. So we really should just be managing for all of the species that we can. Another place in Florida is in Spanish moss. Again, this would be more of the solitary bats. And this might just be a short-term resting spot. This probably wouldn't be where they'd raise their pups, but they could be there just for a day or for a night. And even just among the leaves of live trees, some of those more solitary bats. So trees are really important. Intact forest is very important for roosts and also for foraging habitat, which we'll get to. The other place that we often think of when we increasingly, I think of bats is in human-made structures. So if you've been to certain places, like if you've been to Austin, you've seen the Austin Bridge, maybe you've seen pictures of that, where there's millions of bats living under a bridge. We have some bridges here in Florida with pretty good-sized bat colonies under them. We have the UF bat houses on campus with a lot of bats in there. Sheds, attics, we've got bats using those, and it's not that that's first, and it's not all species that will use human-made buildings, but there are some species that tend to be very well adapted to doing that. So sometimes if you're replicating a structure that they would normally find in nature, and it's their definition of what that is, but whatever structure you created is suitable in the size, shape, warmth, temperature, timing of light and dark. You're just creating the right habitat for them. And so they're like, hey, this is great. This is a good substitute for my natural habitat. Under bridges. Yeah, so when they made the Austin Street Bridge, the bridge in Austin, they at first there were no bats there, and then they did a remodeling project at one point, and they changed the structure that was underneath the bridge, and all of a sudden they got a bat colony that moved in. And what they was not intentional to do that, but they created a structure underneath that was all of these narrow gaps that just happened to replicate the type of narrow little fittings that bats really like to go into. So they just happen to create the right structure for the bats. And it's near water, so they can get water. It's near food because there's lots of flying insects around water. Also bat houses. So we'll talk more about bat houses a bit later, but bat houses are can be a good supplemental resource for bat habitat. It is not the end all be all of bat providing safety and habitat for bats. So it is a substitute for natural habitat. Natural habitat would be preferred if they can't find natural habitat, or if they're looking to expand and there's a bat house nearby, then they might choose to move into a bat house. But it is not necessarily going to attract them if they're not already looking for a place. Here is a breakdown of, generally kind of which bats we'll find in typically larger colonies, in structures, in bat houses and caves. versus some of the more solitary, smaller groups of bats that we'll find in foliage, trees, palm fronds, Spanish moss. So it's our Lasiurus, our tree bats that we generally find in smaller groups. The gray bat is the one I mentioned that is endangered in far north Florida that does live in caves. And one thing that some of you may wonder about is if you've heard of white nose syndrome, that is a fungus that has gone across the country over the last, oh gosh, no, I can't remember what year it started. 20 years now, maybe, that started in the Northeast and has slowly spread down and over and across the country. And so we fortunately, at this point, fortunately for us, we do not have white nose syndrome in Florida. We have not detected it here. We're not sure why, whether it's because our bats are not migrating back and forth, whether it's because of our climate is different, but we have not seen the massive destruction as a result, which is a good thing. It's important to make people aware that that doesn't mean it's not couldn't come here, right? And so one thing that's really important is to make sure to clean gear, clothing, any materials that if you're a caver or no recreational cavers that are going up to Alabama or Georgia and coming back to Florida, it's very important that they clean their gear. They do have white nose syndrome in Alabama and Georgia, so just something to keep aware of. This is the map of white nose syndrome, which shows, you can see this is from the cooler colors are the oldest locations where it appeared. The warmer colors are the newest locations where it's appeared. So you can see it has moved from East Coast to West Coast, and is not in Florida at this point, at least. And then this is a this is the newest map, I guess. This was a few years ago. I think I took this map, and then this is, you can see how it's spread even more in the last few years. So one other bat species to mention is a pretty important one. So it's our Florida bonnet bat. It's endemic to Florida, which means it doesn't live anywhere else but Florida. It's federally endangered since 2013, mostly due to habitat loss and degradation and modification of habitat caused by humans. So most of our bats, the importance is the habitat. They live mostly in southern, well, all in southern Florida. I think the highest county that we've so far founded is in Polk County. So if you're farther north than that, you probably are not going to be encountering a bonnet bat, but if you're there or south, it's possible. So you definitely want to be aware if you're doing any habitat modifications. They also will roost under like tile roofs if you're in South Florida, palm trees, pine trees, man-made structures. They do use bat houses. So be considerate of that if you're in the southern part of the state. This is a range map, but this is not the newest one, so I think it has expanded a little bit since then. Okay, so some of the benefits. So bats are hugely beneficial. All of our bats in Florida, just like almost all our bats in the whole United States, are insectivorous. So they're preying on nocturnal arthropods, primarily moths, beetles, and flies. Flies would include mosquitoes, midges, and they're the only major predator of night-flying insects. So they're the only major group of animals that are out there feeding on all of these nocturnal arthropods that are also the things that are eating things like in our garden and eating us. People often ask about if bats are important for nectar and fruit pollination, and they absolutely are. They're just not important in the United States because our bats in the United States are not eating nectar and pollen. And there are nectar and pollen eating bats in other parts of the world, including Central and South America. So they are important for those things, but in Florida and in the US, they're primarily important for insect prey control or control of insects. So it's estimated that one insectivorous bat can eat up to 1,000 mosquito-sized insects in an hour. So they can eat a lot. They can eat their body weight in food every night. They're not very big. They're this big and they're eating They're just gorging themselves. Again, they have a very high metabolism and they need to eat a lot. So they are really important for reducing arthropod and insect populations. A lot of these things spread other diseases, including, so especially mosquitoes. And they're not just eating mosquitoes. We talk about mosquitoes a lot because it's something people connect with. They're really eating a lot of other things too. So they, most importantly, they're eating a lot of things that we want to control. They're eating agricultural pests, they're eating forest pests. So they're eating things that are eating our crops, they're eating things that are eating our trees. We have documented a lower use of pesticides by having bats around. And so there was a study done several years ago in Texas where they extrapolated out based on what the bats were eating, and they estimated it was saving industrial agriculture $23 billion per year by reduced crop loss and reduced need for pesticides because the bats were there eating pests that would otherwise be preying and destroying crops. So in itself, not only are we saving the crops, but just using less pesticides in itself actually has a lot of ecological benefits because we know that pesticides tend to be negative for the environment. Another benefit is guano. So guano is bat poop, and guano has long been used for numerous things. It's long been known as a really good fertilizer. It's been used for gunpowder. In a cave ecosystem, it's really important for providing nutrients for the cave. One caution is that bat guano can carry a fungus called histoplasmosis, where if it's aerosolized and you breathe it in, it can cause a lung disease. And so if you're ever let's say cleaning out an old shed or something that has had a lot of bats in it, and you have a lot of bat guano, you definitely would want to wear some type of good respirator mask for sure when you're cleaning that up, because the aerosolized particles, you don't want to breathe those in. But the benefits of this guano, so there's caves for many years. Unfortunately, some cave ecosystems have been destroyed because they've used to be mined for the guano and used for things like fertilizer and gunpowder. There are different ways you can use the guano. Even if you have a small bat house, you can collect that and you can make your own fertilizer. There are lots of products on available, different commercial products available. This is just one. I'm not done necessarily endorsing this one. There's lots of different examples of people selling fertilizers with bat guano in it. You can make your own basically by steeping the guano in water and making a tea. I think you need to steep it for 24, 48 hours. You can use that water to water your plants, or you can mix it directly in the soil. You would want to definitely be a little bit cautious of, putting it on edible things like soon before you are going to eat things, because we don't know if it could have certain fungus or bacteria or viruses in it. But if you're mixing in the soil after a long time of growing, you really don't have a lot to worry about. But it's an excellent fertilizer, so that's something you might want to definitely look into. There's a lot of resources and information online that you can find about that. So bats in buildings. I want to talk about this because if I'm gonna, promote you saving bat habitat and protecting bat habitat and maybe providing bat habitat, it's inevitable that some people will be worried about bats being around. They worry, what if there's a bat that is roosting in their attic, or people often find them under patio umbrellas. So it's not unusual to come across a bat if you have a lot of bats around. What happens sometimes is it just gets cold and they're not able to get back to their roost. Maybe they go into torpor and they end up on the side of your barn for the night, and they're stuck there because now it's too cold, they can't go, or they ran out of energy because they didn't get enough food. And it doesn't mean that they're sick. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with them necessarily. It just means that that's where they were, and that's where they're going to stay for probably the next day. And so if you do find one on the ground, also it doesn't necessarily mean that it's sick. It could have just gotten cold. It could have just gotten on the ground and not been able to fly off of the ground. Most of our species need a kind of a drop zone in order to get some air and fly. So they're not used to flying off the ground. So if something happened where they ended up on the ground, it's not necessarily easy for them just to fly. They have to get up on something and climb up in order to fly. So what I will often tell people is if you do just find a single bat somewhere and maybe it's in a spot that you think it's not safe for it to be for various reasons, either because there's a lot of people around and you don't want the people to also interact with them. One thing you can do is get just a regular broom, a long-handled broom, just you put the bristly part next to them. Oftentimes they'll just climb up onto the bristly end and you're at the other end of the handle, and you can take that outside. You can lean it up against a tree or a fence or a wall that has a lot of texture on it. And a lot of times you maybe just leave it there, come back later and get your broom. The bat will have climbed up or flown away. Or they might just climb up immediately and get off the broom and climb up into the tree. And so that's an easy way to kind of move them to another location without having to handle them. Then, the challenge is sometimes we end up with a large colony or more bats than we would like into a barn, a shed, maybe into our attic of our house. So if they're not in the living space of your house, and there's not that many, sometimes it's not really causing a problem. I mean, if I had 100 bats in my attic, I wouldn't worry about it. That's not that many bats. If I had 10,000 bats in my attic, I would probably want to figure out how to get them out of there. And so this is where we talk about exclusions. And this is where the timing comes in, where we can't do anything to the bats between April 15th and August 15th, because that is when the moms are having their pups and those pups can't fly. So if the way we do an exclusion is to block all the openings except for a couple and then leave everything up for a night or two. All the moms fly out in the evening to go feed and they can't figure out how to get back in because on the remaining openings, we put some one-way devices where they fly out, but they can't get back in. If we do that in the summer when the pups are in there, then the pups will be orphaned, right? And then what happens is the pups will die, and then we have dead baby bats in our attic. So that's why we don't do exclusions in the summer. And so we wait until the fall, and then we can do that exclusion when everyone's flying. And then basically you have to seal up every single opening that remains. And I definitely recommend that you get professional assistance with this. It's a lot of work and also can be tricky to figure out where they're coming in and out. Our bats in Florida are small enough that they can fit into a space about the size of your thumb. So if you can fit your thumb into the crack, the bats can probably get through there. And so if you've got an old house or an old shed with a lot of openings, think about how much work that might be for you to actually exclude them out of there. So in general, when we do that, we leave that exclusion device or one-way door up for at least 4 nights. Afterwards, we would want to clean up all the guano, seal everything up. So again, if you're needing to do this, I would definitely seek out professional advice. There are wildlife control operators that can be hired to do this. I'm actually working on a training program or a certificate program for them, so that hopefully that will help everyone know who to call that has at least had some training or at least some acknowledgement of the correct and incorrect maybe protocols to do that. And it's actually a really good video if you're a do-it-yourself kind of person and you want more information on that. There's a good video out there on the FWC website as well as on the IFAS website, I believe. And then I also have it on the Florida Bat Working Group website. Okay, so really quick, I'm going to talk about bat houses because the most questions I honestly get when I go out and do an outreach event. I'm going to be at the Bat Fest this weekend, and more questions I get about it's about bat houses. So there is a really good EDIS document online with a design for a bat house, but just really quick summary. It's really the best thing is not to buy the tiny little house that you might see at some of the big box stores because they're too small. and you're not going to get a colony in there. You might get a single bat that'll come for a night or two, but it's not, you're not going to get a colony. You're not going to providing a lot of habitat. So size is really important. We say at least 1 foot by 2 feet. Bigger, the bigger is better. This is 2 houses back to back with a roof over it. And this is actually the design that we have online on the EDIS page. And bats really like to thermoregulate, and they want a very specific temperature. And so they might want to be in a different place in the house in the morning, depending on where the sun is. They might want to move to a different place in the house in the afternoon, depending on where the sun is and the temperature, and the time of year. And so that's why bigger is better and more options are better, because they're more likely to stay in there if they have some options of where they can find a better microclimate. Here's an example of different chambers. So a 4-chamber house is better than a single chamber house. So this is looking down underneath. So this would be vertical spaces that they climb up into. And so more chambers, the better. They need a place where they can land and then climb up. So landing pad is very important. And then temperature, it kind of depends where you live in the state. You don't want it to be too hot, but also not too cold. People actually underestimate how warm the bats like it, especially if they're going to be having pups in there. Those pups are in there all night by themselves, well, with the other pups, but they they need to stay warm. So depending on where you are, you might go a little bit lighter brown or a little bit darker brown. If you're in far North Florida, and if it's in a shady spot, you might go a little bit darker color, so you get it warmer. If you're in South Florida in the sun all day, all around the year, you might go with a little lighter color. So it just kind of depends. You need to follow some designs and some guidelines and some measurements if you want to build a house. There's very specific measurements that our bats prefer, and if you don't build the house to those preferences, they're probably not going to move in. So other things will move in. So wasps and mud daubers will move in if the bats don't live in there. So you have to keep checking and see if somebody else has moved in your house. The bats won't move in there if there's wasps living in there. And where you choose to put it, you want to think about, there's predators out there. So predators, owls during the night, even during the dusk and dawn, we've got hawks, snakes all the time. So raccoons. So we think about predators. If you put a house up on something like an oak tree that has lots of branches and lots of leaves and shade and things, there's 2 problems with that. One is the bats can't easily fly in and out because there's too many things around it. And the other is that the predators can easily be pretty hidden and but be very close and get into that house or get the bats when they're coming in and out. And the bats know that, right? The bats know that that's not a safe spot, so they're probably not going to move into the house. So some good locations for houses, just in general, if you're thinking about putting some houses up or you have a property, think about near water. It doesn't have to be right next to the water, but yeah, hey, the bats like it if it's convenient and easy. And if they're going to get up and drink water and then there's more flying insects around the water, then that can be a good place. On the side of the building is okay if you want to make sure that it's not easy for predators, raccoons or snakes to get up there, but depends on what options you have. A pole is actually a really good option, and we recommend in general for the house to be at least 12 feet off the ground. And that gives the bats enough security that they're away from the ground, but also enough space that they can fly down. A pole is really nice because very few things can get up the pole. You can also put a guard at the bottom, a predator guard at the bottom if you're worried about things climbing up. You can also do like on a hinge on the bottom, so you can actually lower the pole down. This is really helpful at the beginning if you don't get bats moving for a year, which is not unlikely and it's not uncommon. You might want to check that house and see, hey, are there mud daubers in there? Is there a wasp's nest inside? Is it filled up with gunk? Do I need to clean it out? And so it's helpful to be able to get in there. Once the bats have moved in, you don't necessarily need to do anything to it. It is not like a bluebird house that you have to clean out every year. If the bats are in there, all the guano falls out to the bottom. There shouldn't be anything in there. Eventually, it's a wooden structure in Florida. Eventually it'll start to fall apart. Eventually it will need some repair. It'll need to be repainted. And so you'll have to do that ideally during the winter when the bats have hopefully left and you can take it down and do some repairs. Some bad locations for houses. So like I said, be cautious about mounting on trees. On the bole of a pine tree might be okay. Just depends on what your options are. It's certainly better than a branchy oak tree. If you mount on a building, probably not on metal siding, just because it would probably get very, very hot. And not necessarily near a light. People often think they see bats near lights. They see bats flying around a street light because they think, well, there's insects there, so that's where the bats are. And that's just where you can see the bats. The bats don't want to be by a light because then it's not also not they're more obvious to predators as well. So not necessarily, people often put them like on a light pole, a pole with a light, and that's really not an ideal place. And the most important thing I like to reinforce is just to be patient. As I mentioned when we were talking about habitat, bats are not, it's not that you put up a house and they're like, yay, there's a house. Like, let's move out of where we're at and move into that human-made structure. If they're not looking for a place, if they're happy where they're at, they're not going to move. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't put up a bat house. Maybe you put up a bat house and maybe a year later there's an open lot with trees on it down the street and maybe someone clears that and all of a sudden the bats are homeless and they might be looking for a place. And then your house will be there. And a lot of times it takes them a while to use the house or find the house or choose to move into the house. And so it's okay to leave it up for a long time and just kind of be patient. If it's been a year or two and you're getting impatient, you might try moving it to another location. You might try changing the direction of it or painting it a different color. It's kind of a little bit of a trial and error, and just providing it as an option is not a bad thing to do. So how can you help? So we talked about habitat is in a lot of dead trees, snags. So many different wildlife really benefit from dead and dying trees and snags. That can definitely be challenging sometimes in urban and suburban environments to keep those trees around, but they do provide really great wildlife habitat. If you do know of a bat colony in an old abandoned building or old shed, maybe that's the best place for them. Maybe just leave them there and don't disturb them. Think about spraying fewer pesticides. We know that bats are eating things that are getting sprayed with pesticides, and it's not really good for them. So there's definitely some repercussions there. But that's a delicate issue, right? Because you also don't want the insects around. Access to open water is very important for bats. So they need open water somewhere to drink. Depending on where it is, it can be a lot or it can be a little. Here in Florida, we have so much water that it's generally not a limitation. In Arizona, where I was working, we would get bats that would come drink out of a 4-foot in diameter cattle tank before the rainy season started because there was no other water. So here they might not drink out of something that small, but they may if there's not a lot of other water around. And you can build a bat house. If nothing else, it's a really good outreach tool. People get really excited about it. Just have to be patient and not have too high of expectations that you're going to have a bat colony right away. And most importantly, and I'm hoping for you especially, that you're interested in educating others about the benefits of bats and about how important bats are. There's really no downside to us encouraging bats to be around. They're really having a net positive benefit on eating all the night flying insects that are really causing a lot more harm. A few resources, some of these hopefully you're aware of. So in the EDIS database, there are quite a few documents about bats, and so that would be a great place to look. That is where the document specifically on building the bat house is, if you're interested in doing that. There's a lot of good things there. There's a poster you can print out if you'd like. I've done a couple webinars, one of which is going to be very similar to this presentation. I've done a couple webinars that I can give you the link to this. So they're still online. These are from a few years ago, but they are still accurate, up-to-date information if you want to review. And I mentioned the Florida Bat Working Group that I'm involved with. And this is, you can find our website. I don't have the website linked on there. I can put it in the chat once we are at the question answering part. And a lot of professionals involved in that group. On the Florida Bat Working Group website, we have a citizen science project that is just a way for people to help document if they have a bat roost, if they have a bat house and there's bats living in it, just a way for you to share with us that you have bats. And so we can help try and learn a little bit more about where we have bats living in the state. And if you're in the North Central Florida area or you want to travel, this weekend is the Florida Bat Festival at the Louis Bat Conservancy. Louis Bat Conservancy has big uh, fruit bats, and so they have the big Megacoroptera bats from all over the world, not native to Florida, but really cool to see. And it's the only time you get to go and visit them and see them close up. And then I'll be there. I'll have an education table there, as well as lots of other vendors and organizations will be there. So that is this coming weekend. And the last thing I'll mention, and then we'll take some questions, is the training that I talked about, the training that I'm developing for wildlife control operators. This is not launched yet, but I'm working on the curriculum now. And so once this is available, hoping to make it widely known, that this will be a place to go and look for a list of certified wildlife control operators that can help you if you need to remove bats from a building. And another good resource in general is the Bat Conservation International website. They have a lot of really, really good resources on there. And so that's a good resource. And then my email, if you have questions specifically or you have bat issues specifically, definitely reach out. And yeah, I'm happy to take questions now. I know I probably went a little bit long, but we'll take questions for a little bit. So let's see what we got. Okay. Oh, so many good questions. I don't even know where to start. Okay. So someone asked about opposable thumbs. Can bats grasp things? Yes, they can. So they use their thumbs a lot. They actually use their thumbs to climb and to hang on to things. So when they land on a tree or on a roost or in a house, if they're upright, they actually are using their thumbs as like little I mean, they use their thumbs to climb, so that's what they're climbing with, and they hang on to things with their thumbs. So their thumbs are very important. And why doesn't the huge bat sound send prey into hiding? Oh, that's a good question. So when they're doing echolocation, there's actually been a lot of studies on how the prey interact with the bats. And I am not well versed in this body of literature, but I know that they've studied like how the moths can hear and how actually avoid different frequencies. So there is some song and dance going on between the prey that can hear it and the bats. And so yeah, so I think many of the prey do, but it doesn't stop them from getting eaten. So someone asked what a free-tail bat is. So those are our Melosidae bats, and all it means is the skin membrane connects to not the tip of the tail, but below the tail so that the tip sticks out. So that's what a free-tail bat is. Exclusion, I answered that. Torpor, 50 degrees. So 50 degrees is when torpor sometimes will set in or a little bit below that. 50 degrees is just once it hits that temperature. So it doesn't matter if it's in the day or the night. If it's in the daytime, they're in their roost, so they're not out flying around. So they aren't going to come out though if it's below that. So if it's below 50, if it drops below 50 while they're out flying in the middle of the night, that's where I'm talking about that they might get stuck somewhere because they might get too cold, and so they have to take a night roost and maybe take a nap somewhere, and they are not able to then fly home because it's too cold. So let's see. Someone asked, hanging upside down would normally not work for other mammals. So yeah, bats have a special physiology that allows the blood to not pool in their brain. And I'm not a physiologist, so I can't explain it, but they definitely have documented that they have special capacity to do that. Someone asked about bats pollinating dragon fruit in Florida. Again, our bats are not necessarily pollinating because they're not eating pollen or nectar. And there are nectar and pollen feeding bats, but not in the United States. So could there be bats pollinating dragon fruit in Central America? Yes. Are they pollinating dragon fruit here? Probably not. I mean, the only way I could see that happen is if they're eating insects that are on dragon fruit and they happen to be going from plant to plant that way, but that's possible, but I don't think that's a common everyday thing. Do bats shelter in bamboo stands? They absolutely could shelter in bamboo. Yeah, that would be our tree roosting bats would be in there. So they would be same as like using Spanish moss. It would be small groups or solitary bats. How high do they need to drop to take off? So again, it can vary depending on the bat. Some bats can fly slower and hover, so they need less of a height. But just to be safe, that's why we recommend the bat houses be at least 12 feet high, if possible. Um, So someone asked if there's rescue groups for bats in Florida, and there are bat rehabbers. So if you do find a bat that is injured or orphaned, if you contact whoever your local wildlife rescue people are, they hopefully should have a contact for a person that specifically does bats. And this is going to depend on where you're at. Someone asked about the estimate of the amount of guano production in the UF Bat House annually. I do not have an estimate of that, but I could probably work on trying to get an estimate of that. The garden does use the guano at the UF Bat House. So if you've been to the UF Bat House, there's a garden, the student gardens all around it, and they actually regularly go in with a tractor and shovel out the guano and use it to make fertilizer. They use it in their compost and they fertilize their garden with it. So they're using it on a daily basis. And if they were not doing that, that guano would probably be up to the bottom of the houses. So it's definitely a lot of guano. Um, the gutter installer identified a crevice under my roof overhang and said I should tell the roofer to seal it up. Yep, possibly. Because the bats could definitely get in there. You'd want to make sure there's not already bats using your attic before you seal it up. But other things get in there too. So, but yeah, I mean, people are amazed when you think about the size of your thumb. If you can squeeze your thumb in there, that our Florida bats can fit in there. Mm. Someone said they have a great horned owl in their neighborhood. Would it be wrong for me to have a bat house? Absolutely not. The number of, yeah, the bats are beneficial. The owl is also beneficial. The number of bats that owl could eat would be very low. So, I mean, if he was able to get a bat now and again, that is just the circle of life, and that would be okay. He's not going to like decimate the bat house population. Um, Someone asked, is it safer or more convenient to use bat exclusions, bat houses, or allow them to nest in natural material? So the thing that I often will say to people when they ask me about trying to get bats to move is that bats are their own sentient, for the most part, beings and capable of moving wherever they want. So we don't move bats. We don't come in and move bats. We provide the habitat. If we want them there, we provide habitat that we know that they like, and maybe they'll move in. If we don't want them there, we need to provide habitat that we know that they don't like, or we need to prevent that structure from being available. And so when we do, if they're in an attic and we don't want them there, that's why we have to get them to move out on their own and then seal up all the openings, because otherwise they're going to come right back. Bats really, really like to stay where they're at. And so if we are providing that type of structure that they like, then they're going to stay there. If we don't want them there, we have to remove that structure from being there. Oh yeah. Okay, what time is it? Okay, it's 10 after. I don't know if I should answer more questions or if we should wrap it up.
Totally up to you, Shelly. You're welcome to keep
Trying to
answering
see how
questions
many.
as long as you like.
There's so many more. Okay. Some of them have been answered and some of them are repeats. So someone asked if bats can cause damage to human-made structures, and they definitely can over time, mostly because of the guano and urination potentially. So it would just be from that. They're not doing things that rodents do, like chewing on stuff. They are not chewing on stuff. So you don't need to worry about them chewing on wires or chewing on wood. They're not causing that type of damage. But if you have a colony for a long time, a lot of bats per se, in an attic, eventually you're going to have accumulation of guano and urine, and that's not good. But they're not doing anything else to the structure. Um, I want to well, I was gonna put a couple links in the chat, or is there an easier way to send stuff out to people afterwards, maybe?
We can put it on Better Impact as well.
Okay,
So if you share the links with us, we'll make sure that we get it to our attendees.
okay. Just trying to look through and see if I've answered most of these.
I'm seeing a question about how close does the water source need to be in order to be helpful to the bats?
Yeah, there's not one answer for that. So these bats, so the Brazilian free-tail bat, for example, which is the bat that lives in the UF bat houses, can fly 30 miles per hour. We easily clock them flying just on a night out foraging. So if they're out foraging all night, they could go many miles away if they wanted to. Would they prefer to go closer if there's food and water closer? Yes. Um, is your house intending to be right next to a pond? No, but will it attract more likely to attract them if it is? Maybe. There's not one answer. Um, so anyone asked if there's signs that bats are nearby. Bats are nearby. They just are. They are. People underestimate that there's bats around all the time. We're in Florida. We have great warm weather. They're here all year. You just not see them.
Shelly, let's maybe do one more question that you feel is a really relevant one that really is a good question. And then maybe we'll call it a day.
It's a lot of pressure. Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many questions here. Yeah, I think we'll just, end with just reminding you that the bats themselves are overwhelmingly beneficial. Not only the bats themselves out flying around, eating pests that are causing damage to crops, causing virus transmission to humans. They're going to be way more beneficial than not having the bats. And so the more we can do to protect their natural habitat, the more beneficial that will be. Putting up houses is a great supplement, but think about how you can maintain trees, maintain natural vegetation. Having water available is good, but they will travel for water, and we've got a lot of water around. And so making sure they have roosting habitat is really one of the most important things. So I will share some resources with you guys so you can have those, and definitely reach out if you have questions and any bat issues that you think I can help with.
Thank you, Shelly.
Thank you.